All right, thank you, CJ. So I'm here to talk to you about BDD testing with Cypress Cucumber. My name is Kyle Cobery, and let's break down the title of this a little bit. So let's talk about BDD. So BDD is also referred to as specification by example. So the idea overall is that instead of trying to come up with abstract specifications for how software should work, we describe how the software should work with concrete examples. So you're moving away from saying like, this sum function shall combine any two positive integers, and you go like, all right, well, 1 + 1 should equal 2, and 1 + 3 should equal 4. And so you're trying to find all of the specific examples of your software's behavior that that exemplify how it should operate. And this ends up giving you a really good language to use with your stakeholders, especially non-technical people, and so that you can develop, we'll talk about ubiquitous language in a second, to describe how your app should function. In the process of this, you also end up directly linking what the business needs are of the software to how the software operates. You're essentially writing living executable documentation of the code. As you're saying, this is how the code should work, and I can prove that it works by running it. And tests always kind of do this, but we're doing this in a very natural, like non-techy, very human readable way. Ubiquitous language is an idea that is pinched from domain-driven design, which is an earlier school of thought. And this idea is that when we're describing a specific concept in software, we use that when we're talking about it in business terms. We use it when we're talking about it in software terms. And I'll give you some examples of that in a sec. And then this is not like really a replacement for TDD. It is TDD. It's an evolution of this idea that in addition to growing our software guided by tests, we're also tying in these business needs and the conversations that we have around those. So this Venn diagram, I think, kind of illustrates this. Domain-driven design is primarily a business idea. TDD is mostly a tech idea, and BDD is the intersection of those two things. Okay, so that's the first big concept that we want to get out of the way. I'm specifically going to be talking about the testing part of this today, but there's also the other half of BDD is about conversations that you have with stakeholders. And there's lots of advice and formats that you structure those conversations with. And I just finished a stellar book on this called BDD Testing with Cucumber by Richard Lawrence. He's actually a Denver guy, and he's the guy who got me into Agile 7 years ago. And he talks almost exclusively in that book about how to have the conversations. I'm going to be talking about the other half of that, which is how to write the tests based on the conversations that you have. Cypress, next part of this, a lot of you might be familiar with Cypress. It's a browser automation tool. So it's a way to program the browser. It also has a lot of very BDD-friendly assertions in it. In BDD assertions, we tend to use much more human-friendly language and much less technical language. It also lets you do some things like API mocking that were either not possible or difficult to do with other browser automation tools, like mostly Selenium. I think this is on their website, but if you've ever used Selenium before, Cypress is almost a one-for-one replacement of that, plus a lot of extra things. The one thing that Cypress really doesn't give you, or has historically not given you that Selenium does, is like browser testing matrices. But as of this month, Cypress can do Chrome and Firefox and Edge testing. Still can't do Safari yet, but getting there. It's also super customizable in a pretty easy way. When I was putting this talk together, I got frustrated with how I had to write some of the Cypress commands. And so I was like, oh, I've read that you can customize Cypress commands. And it turns out it's crazy fucking easy to do. And so like with a couple lines of code, you can have your own testing helpers. And they generally look like this. Like a lot of other testing frameworks, it's a mashup of a bunch of different stuff. So if you're looking at that and going like, oh, that looks a lot like Mocha, well, it literally is. It just also has these like browser automation testing tools in addition. And then lastly, Cucumber. So Cucumber is a tool for bridging our business language and our technical language. So we take feature files, which are written in the language of the business. And as you can see, there's nothing technical in there. Those highlighted terms, given, when, and then, those are like kind of magic keywords, but that's sort of it. You can write user stories in plain language. These are things that your non-technical stakeholders can write themselves and edit themselves and can show to each other and have conversations around, and that's kind of the point of them. But Cucumber links those to these step definitions, which are written in a programming language and have the level of specificity that you would expect with a programming language. So when we talk about living executable documentation, this is kind of what we mean. You write the thing on the left, it's tied to the thing on the right, which confirms the behavior of your software. And then one more thing that is not, you don't have to do this with BDD, but it is fairly common, is double loop testing, which I'm going to be demonstrating today. So in agile testing, there's 4 different types of tests. It's a matrix of business-facing tests and technology-facing tests, and tests that support the code and tests that critique the product. So all of our BDD tests are business-facing tests that support the code, but technology-facing tests that support the code is traditional TDD. And so we also do that. And what it looks like is a loop within a loop. BDD is the big loop, that's our Cypress Cucumber stuff. But within that, as you'll see in my demonstration, we still do like red-green refactor TDD loops also. And then when all of our TDD loops pass, then our BDD loop passes as well. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Paperly today. Paperly is an app that tracks how many days of toilet paper that you have left during the quarantine. So we're going to assume that I had my stakeholder conversations, and we started building our ubiquitous language as we were talking about what the app should do. So some things that came out of those conversations are like the term days remaining. That's how we're going to describe how many days of toilet paper that we have left during the quarantine. We could have also called that days left or how many days or whatever else. The point is that we're specifically using the term days remaining when we're having conversations with each other and when we're choosing variable names in the code. That word should be exactly the same everywhere. That's the ubiquitous language, domain-driven design kind of idea. Rolls remaining is going to refer to how many rolls of toilet paper that I have left. The roll rate is going to refer to how quickly my household is consuming toilet paper. And then when I'm talking about all of those things in combination, we're calling those stats. So if I say like, I want to see the stats, that refers to those other 3 things. So Chad, who bless you, you're on this call, was the one who came up with this idea. So if you think it's gross, blame him, not me. He was the first one who answered. All right, so I want to demo some stuff now. My expectation is not that you can do any of these things by the end of this. I want to get you excited about this type of testing. That's like my big overarching goal from this. This is complicated and it takes practice and lots of reading and trying different things out. And that was certainly the case with me. It's going to be the case with you also. But hopefully by seeing what all these things look like together, this sounds exciting enough for you to want to give it a shot. Cool. So I'm going to scaffold out a Vue app, and we're going to call this Paperly. A couple things that are relevant for this. I'm going to manually select the features. I need Vuex, I need the CSS preprocessor, I want the linter, and I want both types of testing. Sass is good. Let's do prettier. lint on save. We're going to use jest for our unit test, the small loop and the double loop. And we're going to use Cypress for the big loop. And I want these in the package.json file. So, all right, so it's scaffolding this out now. And the there's a couple like cleanup things that that we need to do in this process also, and we need to like do some setup stuff. When I was getting started with Cypress Cucumber, this was the fucking hardest part. I have notes on all of these things that I'll share in the. I'm going to put together a doc for this talk that you can refer to. But if you go to my wiki, which is github.com/kylecoberly/knowledge/wiki, in the development section, under Cypress Cucumber, these first couple things here, this like the first 2 days of this was just me trying to figure out this kind of shit. So like you can just copy and paste it if you want it to work like mine, or copy and paste mine and just use that as a basis for what you do. But that's what I'm going to be doing tonight.
There's a question in the chat from Toby. Says,
Hit me.
why Jest over Mocha? Any specific reason?
Sure. No specific reason other than Jest seems to be gaining a lot of traction and is another one of these greatest hits mashups of testing tools. I never had a problem with Mocha and Chai, but I saw somebody say this a couple months ago, and it really clicked with me. They're like, hey, if you already know Mocha and Chai, no harm, no foul, keep using it. If you're starting with testing today, you may as well like skip all that and go straight to Jest. And I thought about that a lot, and that was Chandler Prawl. I'm inclined to agree. It combines all of the Mocha stuff, all of the Chai stuff, and all those like extra little glue libraries that you realistically had to use to do worthwhile testing. For example, Chai doesn't have any promise assertions out of the box, Jest does. And so there's like, I don't know that it's zero config like they claim, but I think it's way less config than Mocha and Chai is, if I'm being honest. So I've been using that the last couple months, and I don't hate it. I don't know that it gained me a whole lot, but I feel like I'm part of a relevant conversation in testing again. So, and it took like half a day to learn coming from Mocha and Chai. So that's why. Good question. CJ, any others?
Nope.
Cool.
Unless anybody wants to bring one up right now, but yeah, just keep going.
Awesome. So I'm going to go into Paperly, and there's a couple of things. This is like a sprint zero kind of thing that I do. Some of these things I do with every new Vue app. Some of them we need to do if we're using Cypress Cucumber. So one of them is installing the plugin. So it's called Cypress Cucumber preprocessor. So we install that, and then I like to rip out a bunch of the Vue CLI boilerplate, which is kind of funny. I use a boilerplate tool, and then I get rid of a lot of it. But and then I'm also going to put in a lot of the config stuff for Cypress. So for the package.json file, there's a config that we need to do, and that is p. Okay, so there's our config, and then I also need to do Cypress JSON. There's a couple of extra things we need to put in this file. Okay, and I need to I need to turn the plugin on, so that one's over here. So we require in the plugin, and then make sure that that thing's running. These steps, like I said, just look at my documentation. They're not really worth talking about. They're kind of fiddly and very specific, but this will get you started. And then lastly, I can't live without my commands. So these are under, oops, nope, that's not it. There we go. Cool. I'll talk about these a little bit later, but these are just extra Cypress commands that we'll be able to use. All right, so I've got that done. And then in the Vue app, I get rid of the logo and their demo component and some of the stuff in the default app file and their styles. I do have some styles because nobody wants to watch me fuck with CSS styles for a while. There we go. That's like prettier has a heart attack. There we go. And last thing that I think you need to do, like this changed in Vue CLI recently, and I find it irritating. So the store file now does all of the Vuex shit in the store file, which makes it more difficult to test. So what we're going to do is rip out some of that and move it back to the main.js file where it used to be. So I'm going to move this up here and this there. And then we're going to refer to, like, whenever we import a store, we're going to call it store config instead. And then we are going to make the store the actual like instance of the Vuex store and pass in the store config. Cool, store's fixed. And I think we are ready to go. So if none of that made any sense to you because you're new to Vue, like follow the guides, watch this part of the video, read my wiki, whatever. All right, now on to some BDD.
Did you actually create the store config, or is that part of your tests?
No, I'm calling, oh, good call. I don't think I took the stuff out of the store. Good catch.
Cool.
So I just want to export a naked JS object now from this. Thanks, EJ.
Yep.
All right, so now let's do some BDD. So talk about that in a sec. So the Cucumber file structure is in our testing folder in the specs directory. Whenever we want to make a new feature for our app, we do the name of that feature, .feature, and then we make a folder with that same name, and then we can put any JavaScript file we want in there. You can call it index, you can call it display stats, you can call it fart, you can call it whatever you want. But any JavaScript files that you put in there are going to end up being grouped together. So we're talking about linking the business language to the programming language. The feature file is the business language, the JS file is the programming language. So we want to display stats for our toilet paper inventory. So we're going to touch test ETE specs, and we'll call it display stats dot feature. We also want to make a directory called that, and then we want to make a JS file in that folder, just like we did here. And then in that feature file, I'm going to go ahead and get a session going here. So we go into that feature file. We use the feature keyword, and we say something like feature displaying stats. And then feature files are grouped by things called scenarios. Scenarios are, all right, so if we're displaying stats, what kinds of scenarios might we run across? And so this one, we're going to start with like, we'll call it standard household or something. And then feature files are broken up into given statements, this is setup, when statements, which are actions, and then statements, which are results. So for example, we might say something like, when I'm on the main page, then I should see 5 days remaining. So bringing in our ubiquitous language, if I go to the page, I should see 5 days remaining. It's a concrete example. Okay, so that's the feature side of it. And if I try running that test with npm run test ede, it's going to fire up Cypress. Oop. It's still just called store. All right, cool. So this is Cypress. And if I click on that feature, then it's going to tell me, all right, well, I don't have a step for I'm on the main page. Cool, easy enough to fix. If I go to that index.js file that I made, I'm going to say, given I'm on the main page, just like I did on the thing. I'm going to put an empty function in here. And then it's saying I'm missing a step for I should see 5 days remaining. And one of the cool tricks you can do is you can just copy the string from your feature file over here and then just kind of JavaScriptify it. And now I have a green test. I went from red to green. Now I just need to make it real. So first thing I want to do is get rid of those annoying prettier X's. Given and then are in the global space, but prettier doesn't know that. So I can import given and then from Cypress Cucumber preprocessor steps. All right, passing test, no red X's. So now I want to make these real. So I could do something like sci.visit home, and that should take me to the main page. I'm linking the technical implementation to whatever the business result is. Oops. I think I pissed off something over here. Let's see. Nope. One of the things you'll see as I do this is the actual Cypress test runner is mega fiddly. So I'm going to have to restart it a few times. It's a small price to pay. It's a really powerful tool, but it is fussy. All right. I'm going to try just bringing in visit. Huh, I don't know what this is. We're going to figure it out together. If you see it, go ahead and shout it out. But I don't see where V is. That looks right. That looks right. This looks right. This looks right. All that looks right. I feel like for sure I put like an errant V in somewhere. with the app file. That looks right. That looks right. Huh. So sometimes in a Cypress, you just need to reload it.
Did you look in the index.js?
I mean the
Or main, like just the main file. This one.
that looks right.
Yeah. Oh.
You see something?
Well, I mean, do you have to create the store after using it? I don't think so. Like moving that line below.
No, I don't think you have to. I don't think order matters on
Yeah.
that. Let's see. That's right.
Wait, is it working now?
Oh, I guess it's working now. Oh, there you go.
Wait, can we confirm that that was the issue? Because I. Interesting.
That is interesting. Good gravy. All right. Thanks, DJ. All right. So back to the action. So if I go to the main page, I got a green test. Now you might be thinking like, all right, I should probably see something that indicates like, I want to see the test fail first. That's fine. So this is where I can start using my test selectors and my custom commands. So the normal way to do this would be something like sci.get, and you go like .logo contains paper.ly. And then that'll fail because that's not on the page and there's nothing with that selector there. And so, all right, no problem. We can add it. I did put a content wrapper around this. I say, all right, Paperly, and I give it that class. And rerun the test. So this is what I mean by like Cypress. Cypress is kind of fiddly. We rerun the test. And all right, we got a green test. Here's the problem with this. So that class, we might also be using that for our styles. We might also be using that for JavaScript functionality. So then we've kind of married those two things together. So if I want to name the class something different, or I'm not using that style anymore, and so I get rid of the class, all my tests break. So the smart move is to make a selector that's just for testing. And so a common pattern is to use attribute selectors. So you do something like data test logo. So we're using data attributes. It's namespace with test, and we're labeling this one with logo. And then you do something like data test logo contains Paperly, and that's green also. So I was doing that enough that I was like, all right, well, I want a custom command for that takes some of the noise out. So I did sci.the, and just assuming that it's a logo, and that works too. And so if you destructure that command out of it, you get like a very BDD-esque logic-free test selector. So the idea behind those is that they're data attributes. They start with data tests. They're not coupled to UI or logic. And as part of your build process, it's pretty easy to find any node that has those and strip them out if you don't want those in your production code.
Why have I never heard of this? It's great. That's
I
like,
know, right?
I mean, because so many times the tests are just so brittle because of the class names, or if you have like QA people writing the tests based on what they're given, they become very fragile. So yeah, that's awesome.
Exactly. And
Cool.
you can also, you can give them values. So like if they're in lists or something, you can give them whatever the key attribute is and like target like different ones that way if you want. It's pretty cool. All right, so all right, so we got this given statement that's passing. So now for this next one, I want something like the days remaining from our ubiquitous language contains 5. And if I look at that, I'm going to get a failing test because I don't have anything with that, that name on there. The fastest way to get it to pass is to hard code it. So let's do it. So I say data test, and this is days remaining 5. And if I do that, then Cypress breaks. The good news is it's relatively obvious when it breaks.
I don't think that your data dash test is the same wording. Yeah.
There we go. Cool. So now we're a green test again. Now here's another cool thing about Cucumber is, all right, well, you could imagine writing steps in our feature file that are like, I see 4 days remaining, I see 20 days remaining, whatever. So with the thing called Cucumber expressions, I can make that a variable and then pass that in here. And now anything that follows that pattern will also work. Now, this is the wildest part about this. Cucumber expressions are relatively new. So if this was 1, then the test would read, I should see 1 days remaining. You can actually write any valid regex in here also and change those to regex. And now that's going to match any capture group in the regex. So I can make a capture group and do something like any number and then make the days optional. Still passes. And it'll match whether I say 20 days or 1 day, or if my non-technical stakeholder writes the step that way and can't figure out why the test doesn't work anymore.
Real quick, there's a comment from Taylor, or question.
Hit me.
For this test, does it matter that in index.js, given does not equal display stats.feature when? Because I guess it's called given in one place and when in the other.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Okay.
So given when and then, just make it more readable. I could make both of these and my test still pass. So it's given when, then, but, and, but they don't actually mean anything. You can call these whatever you want, and you call that one when, you call this one but, all still works. They're just for readability. Great point. Awesome. And then if we keep building out this feature file, then I might say something like, and I should see 10 roles remaining. Let's just get that far. So I do that, and it's going to say I don't have a step definition. So I copy over the step definition. I'm going to make this a then. I can do the same thing I did with the regex for the pluralization. And then this one's roles remaining and should otherwise work the same way. The roles remaining should equal roles remaining. Cool. It's not going to be able to find that selector because it doesn't exist. So I make that roles remaining, and I have 10. So Cypress broke. Cool, and we're green again. then I'm going to say, and I should see a roll rate of 2. So if I copy that over for my last then statement, nothing to pluralize in here, so we can just call it a string. And this is roll rate. And we'll say that the roll rate contains roll rate. And I got a failing test. I call that roll rate, call that 2. Reload the test. Oops, what doesn't it like there? Ah. All right, I got a green test again. Cool. Also, while I'm at it, now that those tests are green, I can make this look the way that it's supposed to look. So I can throw that in a span and say that, and say there are 10 rolls remaining and two rolls per day. And when I rerun those tests, if you see over in the like browser window, it's starting to kind of look like an app. I do need to, in addition to the test selectors, I also need to give them like the styling classes. So I can say days remaining, and call that rolls remaining, and then I can call this roll rate. And then when I reload the test, hey, it looks like my app. Cool. So now that all that's working, like we can refactor this test a little bit, because if I was describing this test, I probably wouldn't say it quite like this. I'd say like, all right, given that I'm on the main page, I should like see the right shit, kind of. Anytime you're doing a lot of like and, it's probably time to rewrite your feature file. So we can rephrase this as, then I should see the following stats. There's the ubiquitous language again. And in our feature file, you can make these like, they're not even as complicated as markdown tables. It's just pipes. So I could say something like days remaining 5 and rolls remaining 10 and roll rate 2. And then fix the indentation. And now it's going to tell me I don't have a step definition for that. Cool. So if I pull it over here, then I'm passing in the data from that table. And you can write it with column headers. You can write it with the labels down the sides. You can write it a few different ways. So it comes in as raw data. And then you tell it how you'd like it to be formatted. So we're going to call the stats raw data rows hash. And then we're going to pull out the individual pieces from those. So we can say that our days remaining is stats at days remaining. And like, I think it's valuable to keep the space in there because that camel casey shit, your non-technical stakeholder, the second they see that in one of these tables, they shut off and go, oops, I knew that wasn't for me. But you can put anything to select something from a hash. So this is how you can kind of square those two things. So we got rolls remaining and roll rate. And then I can take these assertions that I made in the other ones and just kind of pinch them down. So if I go minus 12, move there, and that one's on 10. So I move those there, and then I got a green test again. So that's like right now, let's imagine a scenario where I'm in an apartment complex or something, and we got to know how many rolls the landlord has to go. And so maybe I just update these things by hand every day. It's not nothing. It's still valuable to someone, even if it isn't what we hope it will be eventually, where it's calculating these things and we have some control over the variables, but we've done valuable work. And most importantly, we've done exactly what the people paying for this think we're doing. And we have a common way to talk about that. So I'm going to make a commit there. Those are all the files we changed. So it can display stats. Neat. All right, so now part of behavior-driven development is, well, why doesn't this work? Why can't we just do this? You have to come up with an example where that wouldn't be the case. So you go, all right, well, if that's a standard household, then maybe there's like a heavy use household or something. And maybe that has a much higher roll rate. And if I have 10 rolls, then maybe I should only see 1 day remaining. So right off the bat, the first one will pass, the second one doesn't. It's kind of a neat trick you can do in these Gherkin specs. Is you can put tags on them, and now that's the only one that's running. That's a really useful thing as you're trying to focus on different files. But you can also put whatever tags you want on them, and then you can run these by tag. And one of the cool things about feature files is they're just describing the behavior of the software. You don't have to automate the software. So if you do have some of your tests that need to be done manually, you can also document them with something like manual, and then you can just see the steps that are needed for each step of the manual testing. So even if you have some part of that as part of your app, now you've got it documented somewhere. All right, so the heavy use household one isn't going to work until we make this one a little bit more dynamic. And also, what changes about the app that I would ever see those two different things? So now I can start making some statements about the state of the app inside of these like behavior statements. So I could say, given that I'm on the main page and there are 10 rolls remaining, and the roll rate is 10, then I should see that I have 1 day remaining. All right, so it says I'm missing a step for 10 rolls remaining. No problem. So I can turn that into a given step, make that a cucumber expression, rolls remaining. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put those rolls in the store for Vuex. And this is like another point about BDD that I want to, especially Cucumber in particular, that I want to underscore. We're using this with Cypress, which is an end-to-end testing tool. It's for browsers, for these big, slow tests. BDD itself, though, and Cucumber in particular, doesn't make any assumptions about which part of the stack that any particular step is going through. It doesn't have to go through the UI. So if I want to just set some state in the store here, I can totally do that. And in fact, I made a Cypress helper that does just that. So I call it get store. And what that's going to do is I'm going to call get store, and then I can set state. I can do something like roles remaining, just like that. So that should set some state in the app. And then also have one for the roll rate is some integer. And cool. So now it's still not working, but I have those in there. So one thing that we have to do is, since now we're like setting that state in Vuex, we need to go put those things in Vuex. So if I go over to this store and say that the roles remaining is whatever, we're about to override it, and the roll rate is 2. And then in the app file, instead of hard coding these, now we want to start pulling these in from the store. So we'll pull in roll rate. And then in the script for this, we're just going to alias those from the store. So we'll say roles remaining is this $store state roles remaining. And then the roll rate, same kind of thing. And let's see what happens to our tests now. Cool. So no errors, but we get the same problem because it's still not dynamically calculating what the days remaining is based on those two variables. So at this point, these are my custom Cypress commands, by the way. So we're dealing with a component, that app component. And what we want to test in this is, all we want to test is that the component dispatches actions. What happens after that? Not really the component's business. Oops. And then we have a store. We want to test that when an action fires on the store, that it changes the state. We want to test those individually. The thing that connects all those together is this integration test, are these Cypress tests that are going to test everything out. And also, oops, no, oh man, did it not save? I made this really good diagram that that showed what that cycle looks like. Yeah, whatever, don't worry about it. So so now I need to test the component, test the store that it can do that calculation. So we're going to make a test for a getter that basically is just going to divide the roles remaining by the roll rate. So there's one piece of setup that we need to do in here. We need to install Lodash so that we can clone things. And then this part is unusually difficult to do, I think. It's not any easier to do in React, but it's much easier to do in Angular and Ember. We're going to make a, actually we can just change the unit test. So we're going to go into the unit test that we generated, and we'll make this tests unit store spec.js. And we're going to switch into unit testing mode. So I'm going to clear all this out. I'm going to grab this store spec. And there's a couple things that we need to do in here. We need to bring in create local view from the official testing utilities. We need to bring in clone deep from Lodash. We need to bring in Vuex. We need to bring in the store. So we're going to import store config from store. And then in our test, just like in Mocha, you can kind of nest these describes to just kind of reflect some hierarchy that you want to test. So I can say, all right, describe the store's getters, and then I want to describe specifically a days remaining getter. And then maybe the thing that it does is like it calculates days remaining. It's not my best test title of all time, but we would know that this works if, given some state in the application, if that getter calculates correctly. So to set up like kind of a fake state, we're going to make a local view with that create local view command. And then we're going to tell our local view, oops, we need to make the store also. So we'll pass in this store config, and then we'll tell local view to use that store. And this is where the clone deep comes in. To make sure that you don't like accidentally end up mixing state between different instances of the test, you need to do a clone deep of it. All right, we're in business. So we do those things, and now we have like all the same kind of control over the store that we do in a component. So maybe we get a little bit more specific in this. It calculates 2 days remaining with 4 roles remaining and a roll rate of 2. So we can sort of mirror that in our store setup and do something like store replace state. We say roles remaining is 4 and roll rate is 2. Okay, so the state's replaced. And then we want to make some assertion about what this getter that we haven't written yet returns. So we might say expect store.getters.days remaining to be, was it 2? Yeah. Cool. So now we're making an assertion about that. So let's see if it works.
Just real quick, did you install Lodash separately, or did that come with?
Yes, I did. I did that over here. Yep, there's the npmi.
Cool.
But yeah, it doesn't come with it or anything. So then I'm going to resize this. There we go. And I'm going to npm run test unit. Oops, I'm going to make it watch too. This is not documented as well as I think it should be, but if you want to make it watch, I don't know why it's not the default behavior, but I guess it sort of makes sense with CI or something. You do 2 dashes, and now you're passing an argument to jest underneath it. So then you can do a dash watch. And then, all right, I got a failing test. So if I want to see why it's failing, over here, must call view use Vuex. That's the same thing that happened at the beginning of this. So I made the local view, new Vuex store. All right, is it failing for the right reason at least now?
So I'm not sure, or I'm not familiar with create local view, but I mean, on line 7, do you have to say something like local view.use or in the
Well, that's
function?
what this is supposed to do.
Oh, okay. Well, don't you normally pass the store as a config into view?
Oh, yes. Like somebody who's done this before, like that. All right, are you failing for normal reasons now? No. Yes, you pass it in like that.
Well, I thought so. That object should actually go.
Oh, no, I did it wrong. It's
Yeah.
you pass in Vuex like that.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. All right, am I failing for a normal reason now?
Like 2 lines up, I think. Okay, try again. Like the create local view, do you pass the object in there?
No, you definitely don't pass it in there.
Okay.
It's okay. So there's a new store. I'm doing the clone deep. Got the store place.
You have to use the store variable somewhere, right?
That's what this is.
Oh, okay.
Here.
In that.
All right, I'm gonna go to my my easy bake oven one that like actually works, and just steal it from that.
Cool.
So. All right, so I create the local view. Local view uses Vuex. That's exactly what I did. See, and if I put that, oh no, sorry, that was the one that worked. Okay, those are the same. Local view, create local view. Local view, use Vuex.
Are those happening like synchronously, or do those need to happen like because you have it in the described store and you're doing it before each?
No, they happen in order, which they are here too. So then oh, hang on, I'm missing something. No, this is literally the exact same fucking thing that happened at the beginning of this talk. Come on, man. All right.
Oh, 1 line down, but then yeah, so local view there, yeah.
All right, now we're failing for a normal reason. Come on, man.
Nice.
Thank you. All right, so we set the state in here, and then we say that we expect the state to be this too, but it's not that, it's undefined. All right, fair enough. So if we make some getters in here, and we say days remaining, same shit, hard code it. That's what you want, that's what you get. And getter should be a function. Oop. Like I've done this before. All right, I got a green test. Cool. So just like we did at the top level, we want to use concrete examples to like, why can't I just hard code 2 every time? So I go, all right, well, it does that. We could say it also does maybe something closer to a boundary where it calculates 0 days remaining with 2 rolls remaining and a roll rate of 2. So we have that, and maybe that should be 0. All right, well now I've got a failing test. So if I do something like, it should return state dot rolls remaining divided by state dot roll rate. then oop, got 1. Oh, that means I have, this is a good reason to use concrete examples, because that would be 1 day remaining. If there was 0 roles remaining, all right, now we're green. So the last part of this is that I don't want to have any like fractional days or anything like that. So if I make an example that's like, I have 1 day remaining with 3 roles remaining and a roll rate of 2. And I want the, let's see, 3 roles remaining, roll rate of 2, and it should be 1 day. All right, I get 1.5. All right, so I can just math.floor that. And get a green test. Dope. So now that I've got green test and it kind of works the way that I think it should work, there's a whole lot of repetition in this. Some of it I can extract out into like a before each. And so before each one of these tests, what needs to happen each time? Well, how about these 2? So if I do that, all right, I've got some boilerplate removed and I'm still green. But I still need access to store. I still replace state in the same way every time. It's still, they're kind of noisy tests. So this is a good opportunity to use parameterized tests. So we take the parts of this that change and we make data structures out of them. So you like, I don't know if enough people realize this. You can just write regular ass JavaScript inside of anywhere in these tests. So I can call this the parameters of the test. And maybe pinch this and put days remaining, for that one's 2. And then just put all of these as objects in an array of objects. And so our next example was 0, 2, and 0. So we go 0, 2, 0. And then the last one was 3, 2, and 1. So we say 3, 2, and 1. And then you can each through those parameters say roles remaining. Destructure that stuff out. And then just put your test in here, and you can actually do tests inside of loops. You can calculate these dynamically. So I just make that a template string and change that to days remaining and roles remaining and call this roll rate. And then these, simplify a little bit. And we make that the days remaining. And now we can delete all these other tests. So I am still green, but now my test is way more expressive. It's easier to see what the difference between all these different cases is. So normally repetition in test code is a good thing. It's not like application code where we want to be dry. Your test generally shouldn't be dry. But in cases like this, where you really want to highlight what's different about each case, it really makes sense to do some refactoring. Okay, cool. So I have those days remaining. And then in my, to bring this kind of back home, instead of doing that, I can make this days remaining and then have that come out of this.store.getters.days remaining. And if I did that correctly, all right, everything looks good there. If I go back to my feature file, I'll see what's happening in Cypress land. Oops, too much fucking React lately. Double mustaches. All right, so I pull those in and run the test again. And we are, oops, did I write the example right? I might not have. Let's see if this is right. Roles remaining and roll rate of 1. Okay, that's right. Good, 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 good. That's all good. Let's take a look at my implementation for that. Okay, my setup code for that looks right. Oh, these are probably failing because I also have to do that same setup over here. So given that there are 10 roles remaining and the roll rate is 2, but check that out. I didn't even have to write different code for any of that. And if I do that, days remaining 1, it's saying 2.
It looks like it has the output of the first test, but it's testing the second test.
That might be a fucked up Cypress thing. We'll try restarting Cypress. Okay, it gets all the way through until the, I see the following stats one. Did these look right? 10 roles remaining, yes, yes, yes. And then my set state looks right.
Oh, do those, in that last file, yeah, did the last 2 givens, do those need to come above the then?
No, the order on these doesn't matter.
Okay.
You can put these wherever. Why is that coming through? Okay, these look fine. That looks fine. Look at my actual store. That's fine. That can be whatever. That looks okay. Why is that doing that? All right, so I'm gonna narrow this down. We're gonna get this to work.
So I think you mentioned it earlier that they're interchangeable, but in this file, they're written as and in the JavaScript file, they're written as given.
They're supposed to be. So
Okay.
the general pattern with that is and is supposed to match whichever given when then came before it. So that you can like play with the order on those if it makes sense to make it more readable. Okay, so there's 10 roles remaining. That means that's happening. And the roll rate is 2. That means that that's happening. I should see the following stats.
Yeah, Alice is pointing out that we have, I should see the follow stats instead of following, but it says follow in both. It says follow in both places. But
Good call.
so it, yeah. I mean, so the wording here doesn't really have anything to do with the definitions, though, does it? Or they just have to match in both places?
As long as they match, it's
Okay.
fine. But I'm dying though. Why isn't this working?
Are we sure that set state is actually working?
It's a good call. We can, you can actually test it. So you could say something like get store, get state, and then roles remaining should equal roles remaining. You can throw an assertion in there to test it. Let's see. So that one failed. Expected 5 to equal 10. So that set state didn't work. Did I get any of these mixed up? No, that looks right. That looks right. That is roles remaining. That is the roll rate.
Is it possible that in the store it's not exactly roles remaining, but something else?
That is possible. Roles remaining, roll rate, days remaining.
I think it's the set state because state is staying as 5 instead of changing, so it's keeping the initial state.
Yeah. But that exact helper worked like 3 other times today. So that's the part that's confusing me. Oh, you know why? I know why. Come on, Kyle.
Come on, Kyle.
Because
Okay.
I did it like this.
I see.
All right. And then I got some green fucking tests. Good gravy. So now it's dynamic. And all that's updating. Cool. So one last thing I'll show you here. You can also extract common stuff into a background. So like you go to the main page every time. So you can just make that a separate thing there. And now you don't need it there. Or I probably wouldn't do it in this actual case, but you could also like move that there. You move whatever you want there. And then it's kind of like a before each for a feature file. It'll run those every time. And there we go. Cool. So I have some other stuff I could show you, but I know we're running a little bit long here. So that gives you kind of an idea of what this workflow looks like. And kind of an interesting thing, there's 2 things I think are cool. One is that the reason it's worth going to all this trouble is, let's say that instead of this, I wanted to use something like map state and map getters. Okay, cool. It's like all the rest of this stuff you probably could have done without the test and you would have been just fine. But if I import map state and map getters from Vuex, and I go, all right, well, I wonder if all this works if I use those too. Well, then I could make a map getters for days remaining, and I could do a map state for roles remaining and roll rate, and delete all these. I go, okay, well, I changed some stuff. Does this still work? Oops. Let's fire it off. Oop, didn't like something. Got the syntax on that right, didn't I?
I don't think you changed it in the test. Like you changed one test, you didn't change the other. In the index, in the actual test. So,
oh, that is correct. Cool. All right, we're green. So having those tests gives me the confidence to do a big, bold refactor. Without that, you get too scared, especially big code base. Big code base has been worked on for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 50 years. You want to do a big, bold refactor, you want the support of those tests. So that's cool thing number one. Cool thing number two, I never actually ran this app. So if I go over to like npm run serve, and it's on 8081. Cool, works. And then like I also have some stuff with like action stuff. Those work too. Cool. So our app is tested. Our app is also documented. So we did all the boring like janitor work and it's over. Like as soon as you get the like, yes, it works. All the other cleanup steps, those are done. And the app does exactly what stakeholders think it does. And if they disagree, you can go back to the documentation. You have a common language that you can use with each other. And that is an introduction to Cypress Cucumber testing in Vue. What questions have you?
I have a question about sort of your setup and config. You mentioned earlier that that was sort of a journey that you had to go through and you documented it well. I've noticed for like a lot of testing libraries, like the config is definitely some of the hardest part of even getting started.
Correct.
Before even like getting all the testing going. So do you have any words of wisdom from that experience?
Yeah, it sucks, and I really wish frameworks would take that more seriously. So like kind of a big theme over the year for me has been exploring quality and engineering principles in software development. And like contrary to what a lot of people say, software has some of the best tools in all of engineering. I have a master's degree in engineering. Like the tools that we have for testing whether or not our things do what they say they do are better than every other engineering discipline. But they're so much harder to use. And I think that that really affects adoption a lot. So a lot of those like doing, for example, where's my specs? Doing like all of this kind of shit with the create local view and all that kind of stuff, you wrestle with it and it's so hard to work with. You go, I don't have time for this. Client needs that feature. And so then you don't do it. And so I really wish that the frameworks would do a better job of this. I'm kind of a broken record on like how well I think Ember does things, but I saw a tweet yesterday that I think summarized it really well. The Ember team really prioritized developer ergonomics first and then did performance second. And so now, 7-8 years in, the performance is fine. It's where everybody else is. But they're not bolting on the developer ergonomics after the fact. So, and that is the case, I think, with everything else. And it's unfortunate, but if you can like make things like your own wiki for all this kind of stuff that you can boilerplate and copy paste in, it helps a lot. Because I think that it's really easy to have your motivation sapped when like that config and testing stuff takes a long time. But it does. That's just kind of the truth of it.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah. What else?
Kyle, you mentioned that the syntax of the Cucumber side is meant to be written by basically non-devs.
Yeah.
But like I've worked in a company that had Cucumber before, and it was definitely not written by them. How do you get buy-in from the is this the product owner you're talking about? Like
Sure.
who would you target to write those tests?
So and that's a really good question. So the Gherkin, that's the name of that language that's in the feature file. There's a subtle art to it, but it's mostly like an English language art, way more than it is like a programming art. It has to do with like tenses and how specific it is or isn't, and like a lot of that kind of stuff. But the formalization of it is the last thing that happens. So the part that I completely skipped over, which is the conversations that you're having with your stakeholders as you're understanding what the software is supposed to do, and as you're generating that ubiquitous language together, you don't start with the Gherkin file. You start with note cards and like whiteboards and those kinds of things. And then you start coming up with the examples. But even at that point, you're still just kind of fucking around a little bit and talking real loose. Once you agree on what the relevant examples are, that's when you formalize it. And so the assumption is that you've already been having a lot of conversations with your stakeholders to generate what these examples are. And at that point, formalizing them, if you do 2 or 3 with them and they see how not scary it is, that really, I think, lowers the barrier to entry, especially if they start by just editing ones that you've written. They go, you know what, that is exactly what we talked about, but what if it worked more like this? And they just edit existing examples. And before you know it, like, they'll be comfortable writing their own scenarios. But even if they never do, even if all they do is read them, if you write in a clear enough non-technical language, you've made that a tool that helps people remember parts of their conversations and helps like guide future conversations. But it is a benefit that stakeholders could participate in the writing process also. What else? These are my notes on Gherkin. And so I read basically everything that I could find on the topic. And these are like some rules that I found on like things that shouldn't be in there or what should be where. The scenario title shouldn't have these. And then I have all these examples of what good ones look like. And then a bunch of ones of like what bad ones look like. And then I made this like menu for myself of like, what kinds of language could you use to build these. It takes some practice, but it's not programming. Like I said, it's way more of like an English language kind of thing. Like that.
Would you mind showing the, even if it's briefly, the custom directives you did, like the?
Absolutely. So these are the custom ones. Cypress commands add what you want the command to be called, what you pass into it, and what it should yield. Now, yielding is like a kind of a medium advanced Cypress topic, but the idea of it is that Cypress doesn't use promises. You can then, you cannot async await, but the way that it manages this for performance reasons and like a few other reasons is that it does a lot of fundamentally asynchronous things in a like magical way. So it's, like I said, it's not promises, it's kind of its own thing, which is why none of these actually return any values. But ultimately, you're just writing out whatever the Cypress command would be. And you can do some pretty wild stuff too, like this with one. If the command needs to follow a previous Cypress command, then you just tell it that it has a previous subject, and that ends up being the first argument that gets passed into this. But like figuring out how to write these, like that was maybe an hour. It's pretty straightforward, honestly, and they have good guides for it on the site.
Cool, thanks.
What else?
Unrelated to testing, but there were some questions about just your editor setup.
Oh, yeah.
So I linked to your dot files, but do you, like, first, are those up to date? And do you have any resources on using Vim and Zish and different stuff like that?
Sure. Let's see if I go over to my dot files. No, they are not up to date. All right, now they're up to date. So I've been working on my Vim files for like 7 years or so now. Some highlights, actually, I have it hotkeyed in. So these are the plugins that I use. Like very little of this stuff is like too crazy. There's a couple neat things like I do any like long form writing that I do in Vim also with a plugin called Goyo. Also Vim Pencil. It handles writing. It's like a distraction free mode and like a lot of other editors. Things like the tab bar at the top and the little status bar at the bottom. Both of those are Vim Airline. If you noticed that I could do things like this fuzzy finding for things, all that is CTRLP. Those are the ones that like I straight up could not live without. But there's also like, these are like the general config things that I do. Like I use relative numbering, which you may have seen. The line that I'm actually on, that has the real line number, and then the rest of them are relative to that. The advantage is it helps you move. So if I want to move 7 up, I type 7 and K, and it just takes me up there. But every once in a while, like when I'm writing Vim X commands, like it's way easier to do that with the actual numbers. So I actually just added this one yesterday. You can switch to absolute numbers with a command. My prettier setup is just based off of ESLint, and that's with the plugin called Ale. That autocomplete is a thing called Deoplete. And let's see, it's colors. And then I have a couple custom commands like I can do all my Git stuff from Vim. Buffers are like files. So any files that I have open, I have some custom commands for those. And then the thing you see down at the bottom that says server, editor, test, and whatever, that's not Vim. That's a tool called Tmux. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want to learn Tmux. You can learn Tmux in an hour. There's really not that much to it. It's just a way to manage multiple terminal instances. And there's like some pretty cool, powerful things you can do with it. But everything that I actually do in Tmux, I probably learned in the first 20 minutes. And then like that plus Vim together, like you've got an IDE, except it loads an hour quicker and is way more customizable. And overall, I just find it like the catchphrase for Vim is edit text at the speed of thought. And that's exactly what it feels like to me. I never think about what I'm doing in Vim. I think about what I want the code to be. And then as soon as I've finished that thought, it's on the screen. And that's the big selling point to doing something like this. Also, that boilerplate that I put in at the beginning, that's, oh, you want to say hi? All right, my boy wants to say hi. This is my son, Miles. Mwah.
Hey, Miles.
All that boilerplate I was doing at the beginning, I read about somebody doing this and I thought it was cool. Like all those styles, I put those in a register, which is like a named copy paste thing. And so I can do like, I want to copy and paste, or I want to paste from S, and that's just all of these styles. And then when I save it, I just let Prettier fix the formatting on it. But that ended up being a lot better than copying and pasting out of my Git wiki. But yeah, man, I'll talk your ear off for days. The Vim channel on Never Devs is super active. So if any of this made you want to like pick up Vim, start hanging out in that channel. There's a lot of people that love the fuck out of talking about this text editor. What else? Going once.
I was going to ask you, have you done any tests to try to generalize UI behavior? And I'm a very new person here. I have never touched any BDD stuff like this before, but like, you know, responsive design where you have a very small screen and then a very large screen, and certain text is available in a large screen, but not in a small screen.
So you have some control over that with Cypress. So if you go to the docs, there's a couple cool things that you can control. Like you can manage things, local state, like your cookies and whatnot. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I think window just gives you the actual window object. Viewport, here it is. So you can set the viewport dynamically and like run assertions based on that. Most of the time, it's probably not worth doing that directly in Cypress. You can do snapshot testing with Jest that will handle some of that. And then something like Sauce Labs is probably better for like pure UI testing, because what Cypress doesn't do in any like actually useful way is like, all right, is this thing actually the same color? Did this animation work? Like any of those kinds of things. But there are tools for that that like actually just diff pixels. And you can say, all right, as long as it's within this percentage of like pixel difference and stuff, that works. Those tests are slow as fuck though. So you can't do very many of them. You really want to do like one of those per screen. And you probably, it's not very useful as you're developing the app. So that's more of a like critique the product kind of thing, but there are tools for that. Cypress isn't one of them, and BDD doesn't have a particular opinion on it. What else?
See that Cypress supports Firefox and Edge now. That's pretty cool. It used to just be Chrome, right?
That's like 2 weeks ago.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. Outside of that, it supports Chrome and Electron, which is Chrome. But what's cool about that is you can do something like, oops, over here. So I can do something like npx cypress run. And wait for it, takes a sec. Oh, because I'm not actually running the server. At least I'm not running it on the thing that it thinks I'm running it on. If I change that to 8081 and try running that again. It can only do this in Electron, but you can run these tests on the command line. This is mainly meant for CI servers. So you can have your CI server run all your tests for you. But what's like, if you can't tell, I'm kind of a command line junkie. And so I haven't been able to get this to watch and not be as flaky as the watch command is in the GUI. But there's a similar tool called Testum that was a little bit better at this. But you saw like how I like running this over on the side, just enough that I can see whether or not it's green or red, and then I can focus it if I need to look at something more. I really like doing that for end-to-end tests also, but I've kind of given up the ghost on it. And another thing that's really useful about the Cypress approach to that in particular, is if I do npm run test e2e, is that like kind of browser preview window that you see in the tests. That's an actual browser window. And so we can do things like element inspect things and look at what the console is. And if like that wasn't cool enough, you can look into these and you can actually see the state of the app at all of these different points in the test. And you can log things at those points in the test. Like Cypress is bonkers useful. Yeah. Cool, what else? Going once. Going twice. Sold. Thank you so much, everybody. This is a lot of fun.
Wonderful talk. I enjoyed it very much. Very good.
I'm glad. So I'm going to post up my slides and like the code and stuff from this. You can find it on kylecoberly.com. You can find me on Endeavor Devs at @KyleCoberly. And thank you so much, CJ, for hosting tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kyle. That was great. Thanks everyone for attending. And I don't know if the next meetup will be remote, but just keep an eye on the meetup channel. And we don't have a speaker yet, so if you have a talk in mind, please do submit. But yeah, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.